Because let's face it, those who set off the bomb in Alexandria at All Saints Church on New Year's Eve this year, those who shot innocent civilians coming out of a church at Nag Hammadi on Christmas Eve 2010, those who targeted civilians at El Khush, and those who commit similar acts on an individual basis in Egypt share a similar hateful, extreme, dangerous, and violent and destabilizing ideology in other countries in that region. And this, of course, is one of the most significant challenges that we face in the world today. How can we as a country more effectively intervene as a voice for the voiceless, for the vulnerable? Just next week, Madam Speaker, for example, I will be welcoming here to Ottawa Minister Shahbaz Bhatti, Minister of Minority Communities for the government of Pakistan. As the first Christian in the Pakistani government, he has seen members of vulnerable communities in his country attacked, murdered, tortured, persecuted, be they Ahmadiyya Muslims, be they Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, Catholic and Protestant, and again, attacked by people who share the same hateful ideology of those who have committed similar acts in Egypt. And it just does concern me that some of those people are prowling the streets of Cairo and Alexandria as we speak, presumably. It is our hope that the emerging democratic forces will, as a very first order of business, exclude from participation in a government those who would tolerate or excuse those attitudes. Now, more generally, Madam Speaker, I would say in the broader strategic situation in the region, that should it is our hope, it's certainly my hope, that a future Egyptian government will realize that it has a profound interest in maintaining a peaceful coexistence with the democratic Jewish state of Israel. It is not in the interests of the Egyptian people, regardless of who governs them, to return to the state of war, of uncertainty, instability, violence that plagued Egypt's relationship with Israel from 1949 until 1976. And Madam Speaker, I am concerned that the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in a prospective future Egyptian government would be a destabilizing influence. There can be no doubt that that organization shares certain ideas, certain connections with such organizations as the Party of God, Hezbollah, in Lebanon, which now is a key part of sadly a key part of the government of that country, and of the organization Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip bordering Egypt. And so, Madam Speaker, with the apparent increasing influence of Hezbollah, with the rejectionism and extremism of Hamas, with the continued instability of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is certainly our hope that the Egyptian people will choose wisely, will ultimately, in the choices they have to make in the coming days and months, will choose to embrace the dignity of a great and ancient civilization and reject those who would drag that country into a downward spiral of violence, extremism. So I certainly join with all of my colleagues in hoping for the best possible outcome and committing myself to play whatever role I can in this Parliament and government to offer Canada's assistance in that direction. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Toronto.
Well, Madam Speaker, let me thank the Minister for his intervention, which, as always, is a thoughtful and lively one, and expresses so very clearly a profound point of view, which I think, in most respects, is very widely shared in the House and in the country. My question will be remarkably parallel to some of the ones I've asked other members of the government. I find it interesting, Madam Speaker, that the government has identified a clear priority for Canadian foreign policy. The Prime Minister stating very clearly that the promotion of democracy and human rights is a clear priority for Canada all over the world, and in particular now in the Middle East. This comment was repeated by the President of the Treasury Board, by the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I plead with the Minister, when you actually look, and I know a little bit about this, when you actually look at where there are significant gaps in how we are actually investing through DFATE and through CETA, what you will find is that the great gap now is in this area of governance, in this area of democracy promotion. I'll give the Minister one very practical example. In my previous life, I was involved in a series of initiatives in Iraq, where we were trying, the Forum of Federations was working with the National Assembly of Iraq and dealing with the question of their constitution, dealing with federalism, but dealing, generally speaking, with how do we create a better system of governance in Iraq. Funding for any project involving governance in Iraq was cut off. Now, it wasn't cut off for ideological reasons, for whatever. I'm not alleging any political interference. It was cut off because there had been a bureaucratic decision that governance was no longer a priority, that CETA no longer did governance. My colleague from London can give the same experience with respect to Sudan. When we go to Sudan, the people who are on the ground in southern Sudan are begging for assistance on governance. And it's a real challenge, and we see this again. You're going to be talking to the people in Pakistan. The people in Pakistan are looking for assistance in governance which looks at federal structures, it looks at pluralism, it looks at diversity. Your government is gladly supporting the Aga Khan Foundation, the establishment of the Center for Pluralism, which is a great thing. But I would ask the Minister, in quite a nonpartisan spirit, I'd ask the Minister with his colleagues, have a look again at this question of how we do the interventions on democracy. I appreciate his comments today. They were Burkean, they were thoughtful, they were, as always, engaging. I think anyone listened to the comments of the President of the Treasury Board. I didn't agree with all of the conclusions to which he reached out, but when he said that we need to match our passion for freedom with our sense of historical experience, well, I spent several years writing a book on that very subject, so I agree with him. I agree entirely with that spirit. But I really reach across the House and say to the Minister, I would desperately like us to be able to get to a point where we could, in fact, make a common move on this question of democratic governance.
The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Well, I thank the member for Toronto Centre, Madam Speaker, for his intervention, typically a thoughtful intervention, with which I would like to associate myself. I understand the member has recently published a book on the promotion of democratic principles and governance, and I apologize to him that I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's on my reading pile. It's in my reading pile. It's a very slim book, though, Madam Speaker, so it shouldn't take too long. The member makes, I think, thoughtful points. I would argue that we do have various programs in the field around the world to support democratic development. I have certainly many friends who have been involved in those projects through the support of other governments, such as the National Endowment for Democracy of the United States, the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican Institute, and so forth, the Westminster Foundation, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and we know the many excellent examples. And I know that the Foreign Affairs Committee of this place conducted a very thoughtful and thorough study of programs of this nature. I would underscore that my party, the Conservative Party, included in its platform in the last general election a commitment to the creation of a democracy, a project to advance democratic values around the world, and indeed appointed Tom Axworthy, who's been a strong champion of this concept, as chairman of an advisory committee. Now, I believe that in principle we are of one accord on this objective of a greater Canadian role in democratic development. And we have a unique role to play because we don't carry the stigma that our friends to the south do in some parts of the world. We don't carry the post-colonial baggage that our European allies do. And so we have a unique role that we can play and ought to play. There is, at the same time, of course, for whoever sits on this side of the House, the very prosaic reality of a challenging fiscal situation. Every developed country is facing that, Madam Speaker. I don't know of any democratic country that is expanding efforts in these or similar areas as they deal with some very serious fiscal challenges, and we can't ignore that. And we could say, well, that's just because the government is. We could throw around rhetorical barbs, but the reality is every advanced economy in the world is facing a very significant deficit, and new investments in programming areas like this are simply difficult to manage at such a time of constraint. But I think the larger point raised by the member for Toronto Centre is entirely well taken, and I hope that we can continue working towards the noble objective of a deeper, broader Canadian participation in democracy promotion programming around the world.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Yukon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And unfortunately, I didn't hear the minister's whole speech, so he may have covered what I'm going to ask. I've been in some late night debates with him before, but I just wonder if he's addressed immigration to the extent in preparation of if there happens to be the wrong, poor outcome of a group in leadership that targets a particular minority. I won't make any suggestions. If the minister, first of all, what the normal process would be as these type of world crises occur, where there may be an influx of refugees or requests for refugees. And second of all, if the minister has thought about, in this particular case, done any preparation for that possibility.
Honourable Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, we, as I said, when our embassy is able to go fully back to work, we will assess whether there are urgent cases in need of prioritizing. An example would be people who have been victims of violence. Let's say a Canadian citizen has a relative who has made an application for family sponsorship, and they have been subject to violence or are in some form of particular risk. In such cases, we would typically give priority consideration to such applications to accelerate them. We've done that on a wide-scale basis in the wake of large natural disasters such as the Southeast Asian tsunami, the Pakistani earthquake, the Chinese earthquake in Sichuan, as well as more recently the typhoons in Philippines. So we have created sometimes special programs and additional resources to accelerate processing of applications for example, family sponsorship in those cases. This is a little different because the definition of a refugee in both our law and international law, Madam Speaker, is someone who has fled their country because of a well-founded fear of persecution on the grounds of religion, political opinion, gender, ethnicity, etc. And so people who might be on one side or the other of the political conflict in Egypt, but who are still in Egypt, are not considered refugees under our law. It's only if they flee, and if they were to flee in significant numbers, typically what we would do would be to work with the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees and other countries to seek a durable settlement solution for them. But that's very hypothetical. I frankly hope that it doesn't come to that in Egypt, and I don't believe that it will.
Questions and comments? Resuming debate.